Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Solve My World podcast, where we say to ourselves, if I want to solve the problems of the world, I first need to solve my own personal world. So today I want to talk about where the idea for Solve My World came from, what its purpose is, how exactly to implement the ideas discussed, and then what forms it is taking now and in the future. So, just a little bit of history. When I first started thinking about doing, a blog or videos, things of that nature, where I wanted to start sharing some ideas, I started focusing on some different niches that I was interested in. I think my first blog was called like Joe's Technology Blog or something like that, where I reviewed different software and technology that I was interested in. I think I only got a couple posts in before I lost my desire and interest in it and stopped doing that for a while. And then after a while I started up another one where basically I just talked about political type stuff, the problems I was noticing in the world. This was all when I was a teenager in high school, and but in each one of these little niches that I started thinking about, well, maybe I should start talking about this subject or delve into that subject. I just found that it wasn't quite all encompassing enough. It wasn't broad enough for me to stay interested. And so I spent the next several years trying to discover what was it that I really liked talking about at the core. What was it that all of these different subjects had in common that made me interested in wanting to talk about them, so that I could tie everything together. And as I thought about it, eventually I realized that the thing that really I like to do is I like to find problems and create systems that will solve those problems, so that anyone can implement those systems to solve those problems, and in theory, could solve the problems big and small in the world, by coming up with these different systems or ideas. And so that's where the idea came from. And I played around with a bunch of different names, but eventually the one that I settled on, partly because the domain was available and it fit what I was looking at, was solvemyworld.com. And so that's where the name came from. And so the idea turned into, how can I solve my own personal life and do it in such a way that I can teach others the same principle, so that they can implement it in their life. Because it's one thing for someone to be a successful person, but it's a totally different subject to be able to try and show others how they can also be successful. So that's kind of the purpose of Solve My World. So let's dive into it a little bit more. So let's go look at the purpose that I have. This is a little mind map I created. It is incomplete and will always be expanding, but if I waited until it was done, it would never be done, because it's always expanding. So this is what I have now. So the purpose of Solve My World, there's two main purposes. The first purpose is to solve your personal problems, and then the second purpose is to solve the world's problems. And so a few examples of solving your own personal problems I have, like achieve your dreams, which leads to having happiness, getting out of debt, and becoming your best self, so that you can then be a good example in the world and be a producer, not a consumer. it's very important in the world that we're all contributing and not being a negative impact on the world, because the more negative impact people we have in the world, the more producers we need to keep up with all the consumers. And ideally, we want everyone to be a producer so that we can all improve our lives together. So that's the personal side of it. Now, if we look at some of the world's problems so far, I've got making a difference in the world and helping others. I think it's really important that as we become successful in life, that we share that success with others, so that we can we can spread the happiness around, and that in turn makes us more happy. So that's kind of the basic purpose of Solve My World: to solve your personal problems and to solve the world's problems. So moving on then from purpose, let's go to look at how we can solve our own personal worlds. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on in this mind map here. So let's zoom in a little bit on the main topics. We'll jump in. So I basically have 5 different steps that you go through to solve the problems in your life. So the first step is to get your mindset right. You need to be in the right frame of mind for you to be able to take any of the next steps. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get where you're going. And we'll jump more into each one of these subcategories in a second. But the next step is to be looking at your holistic context. It's looking at your life in a holistic way, meaning looking at the big picture. What do you want your life to look like? And that's a big step that you need to take. And it comes second after mindset, because if you don't have a picture of where you want your mind to go, where you want your life to go, then how are you going to know how you should plan your life and what problems you need to solve? So the next step is to focus on your circles of influence. So your circles of influence are it's how far out your influence goes from yourself. So when you're first born, or when you're young in the world, really the only influence you have is over your own personal life, and to a big extent, you don't have that much control, because your parents have to make sure that you don't kill yourself when you're little, and teach you things. But as you get older, pretty soon you're in charge of your own life, and then maybe you make some friends and you become more well known in the community, and so your circle of influence expands. The people that will listen to you, I guess, kind of like your power or your influence in the community grows. And it doesn't do any good for you to focus your life on things outside your circles of influence. And we'll get more into that in a second. So the next step is to use the laws of the universe to your advantage. And then the last step is to create systems. So let's jump into mindset. So I've got a bunch of different examples here, but basically with your mindset, there's things that you need to become, and then there's things that you need to stop being. So a few examples I have of what you should become is you need to be aware of your surroundings. You need to be fearless, honest, realistic, motivated, positive, responsible, confident, open-minded, disciplined, driven, humble, and faithful. Because with faith comes action. And in future episodes, I'm going to get more in depth on a lot of these different mindsets and how to cultivate them and why they're so important in things. But for now, those are some of the things that I think are important to your mindset. And then a few things you need to cut out of your life, you need to stop being. So you need to stop being blameful. You can't solve your problems if you're blaming other people. If fear problems. You can't be scarcity minded. You can't be thinking that there's not enough to go around and that the only way for you to win is for someone else to lose, because then you're going to just be creating enemies. You need to stop being dependent. You have to stop being hopeless, stop being negative, and stop being a procrastinator. And I think we all have some of these tendencies in us, and we just need to focus on building the good things and removing the bad things in our mindset constantly so that we can move on to the next steps. So that's mindset. So let's move on now to the holistic contexts. So the holistic context is a huge, huge subject. Like I talked about before, holistic, if you think of the root word of that, whole or all encompassing, you need to define your goals while looking at the big picture. So instead of just being like, well, at work, I want to get a raise, you might think to yourself, what is my work doing to contribute to a happier life? Or what is a happier life to me? You know, a happy life for someone might not be a happy life for someone else. I might want to be a workaholic and never take vacations, and someone else might want to take vacations all the time and not have to work unless they have to. And we need to look at that and decide what is it that we truly want, and then define the goals on how we can accomplish that. And that is obviously as well, it's an ongoing process, always refining what our goals are, what our vision for our future is. So that's holistic context. Next, we'll move on to circles of influence. So the keys to working within your circles of influence is, first, you need to start with yourself and then work outward. So you need to focus on the things that you can control in your own personal life, and only focus on what you can influence. There's pretty much nothing I can do about what is going on in the government right now. You know, I can vote, and that may or may not have very much of an impact. I can maybe go and talk to my friends and family and tell them what they should vote for and things like that. But at the end of the day, there isn't a lot that I can do personally to solve those problems. But I can solve the problem of my room not being clean, for example, or my attitude isn't correct. You know, these are things that I can affect. And then, maybe I can branch out a little bit more. I can maybe affect what goes on in my local town. I have friends and family that live near me that I have some influence on what things can happen in my local area. So I might be able to make a difference in my local area and solve some of those problems. And so you want to just focus on the things you can control and let go of the things that you can't control. And if that's something you want to do, if I want to be able to, solve the problems at the government level, at an international level, then I can work that into my holistic context and start working towards that goal. I'm going to have to become a person of influence. I'm going to have to start, getting a following, becoming, popular, I guess, so people know who I am, so that people will listen to what I want to say and that I will have influence. So you see my circle of influence expands out wider and wider if I want. Or maybe I don't want to worry about that and I want to focus on helping the kids in my local community to become the best people they can be and make a very big impact on a small number of people's lives in that way. And neither one of those, I think, is necessarily right or wrong. But the point is, you need to focus on what you can control and stop worrying about all the things that you can't control. All right, so that's circles of influence. So let's move on to using the laws of the universe to your advantage. So I've got two sections in here. One, the scientific method, and the second, laws, principles, and practices. So when we're talking about using the laws of the universe to your advantage, what that means is what I'm talking about with that is there are certain laws, principles, and practices that go on in the world. And so let me break that down a little bit. So first, laws. What I call the laws of the universe are basically the unchanging things. That's just the way it is, and no matter what we do about it, that's the way it is. So some examples, from science is gravity. As far as we've been able to test it, gravity pretty much always works the same way. Now, I know when you get down to the microscopic level and the atomic level, gravity starts doing weird things that we don't totally understand. But as far as we've been able to test in the normal world we live in, gravity is going to pull you down on Earth at 9.8 meters per second squared. So that's a law of the universe, and whether or not I agree with it, that's the way it's going to be. And I think that there are laws in every aspect of our lives, and we just have to discover them. And so that's part of the purpose of this is we need to try and figure out what are the laws, the unchanging principles that apply to everyone. Whether it's if you punch someone in the face, they're going to be mad at you. That might not be a total law because some people won't get mad at you, but if a person is a certain type of person and you punch them in the face, then they're going to get mad at you every single time. There might be an underlying law of the universe. People don't like to be punched in the face. That is underpinning that. That's a little bit of a silly example, but that's the idea I'm trying to get across. Is that there's certain things that if you follow a system, you'll get the same result every time. The difficulty is in the world there are so many variables that it's difficult to pinpoint when there's an act, like what the actual law is. If I said that everyone loves to play soccer and I went and asked all my friends, then you might be able to say, oh yeah, it looks like that's a true principle because most of my friends like to play soccer. But if I took out the variable of if I expanded the variable of my friends out to the wider population of the world, you'd quickly discover that that's not a law of the universe, even though maybe it should be. But that is the way that the world works. Is there's these laws that underpin everything we do, and the difficulty is discovering what they are. And that's kind of that's why this is a major tenet of how to solve our world, is because the closer we can get to discovering what these principles are, what these laws are, the more we can use them to our advantage to solve our problems. So that's laws. Now, principles are similar to laws, but they're more like on a case by case basis. It's more of like a should do type thing. Um, let's see. I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe you should treat people, or if you treat people kindly, then you will be treated kindly in return. That might be a good principle, but it's not a law because that's not always the way it's going to happen. Um, in general, it's probably going to happen most of the time, and so it's a good thing to do. But you can't bank on it. There's still some people that are going to take advantage of you. There's psychopaths and sociopaths out there that don't care about if you treat them kindly or not. But that's a principle that you can follow. And so those things are a little bit fluid. They're more person to person applicable, but they're also very powerful in helping you solve problems in the world. A great example I can think of is like one of my favorite books, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It is chock full of principles of how you should communicate with people, and how you should treat people, that basically makes it so that people will want to be your friend. They'll want to do things that you ask, not necessarily like you're manipulating them, but it's just a principle that if you treat someone in a nice way, then they're going to want to be nice back to you. And so that book is chock full of great principles um, that that can help us to solve social problems. So that's why I really like that book. And then practices are things that it's kind of like a system that we do to apply principles and laws. So a practice is when you basically build a system that applies the laws and principles. So the practice itself isn't a law or a principle, but it applies them for you to solve a problem in your life. So maybe it's a budget that you stick to. You know, the budget that you build is a good it works for you, not because the budget itself is like a law of the universe, but there are laws of the universe that you're following. You know, like if you treat money well, then you'll always have money. Of course, that's probably a little bit more of a principle, but it's the idea of now you're trying to apply those things. So the practices you should be changing those all the time because you're always trying to refine them and get them to be more specific to the laws and principles. And we'll get a little bit more into how to do that when we talk about systems, because it's pretty much the same thing. But laws never change. Principles change according to the situation. And then practices are things that you're always changing to try and make better use of the laws and principles that you've learned. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense, and I'll keep working on trying to simplify that principle, that idea down to make it more simple to explain. But hopefully you at least understand the basic idea of there's a certain way that the universe works, and if we can discover the way that it works, we can use that to our advantage. All right, so let's move over to the scientific method. Okay, so the scientific method, I know this isn't like whatever the official scientific method is, but it's the one that I use as I try to discover these laws and principles of the universe. And what it is, and the steps I take are to first observe, then to learn, then to refine, then to test, and then to observe and repeat. Observe, learn, refine, test. And so the first step, observe, you're trying to look at the world without judging it. You're just trying to understand what's going on as passively as you can. Just absorb as much information as you can. And that bleeds over into the next step, learn. So you're trying to discover maybe there's a natural law in here somewhere, a law of the universe that I can harness. And then you refine whatever system you are using, and then you test it to see if it works. And then you observe again. You observe the system, see if it works, and you learn from the mistakes that you make, because it's never going to be perfect. I guess I shouldn't say never, but probably won't ever be perfect. And then you refine it, and then you test it again, and you just keep following that process as you discover more and more principles. For example, when we first got a steer, my wife and I got a steer that we wanted to raise. We wanted to do some rotational grazing with it, and so I didn't want to go out and spend any money, and I didn't totally understand what I wanted to do yet. I thought maybe I wanted to do some electric fencing, but I didn't really know how electric fencing worked, and so I didn't really want to do it yet. So we just got a 10 by 10, 4 panels that made a 10 by 10 pen, which gives about 100 square feet. Problem is, our steer needed 300 to 400 square feet of feed, of grazing area per day. So my wife and I had to go out there 3 or 4 times a day and move him. And every time we moved him, we had to move his water, and we had to get everything set up. And it was just a real hassle. So so then we learned, this is a big pain in the butt, and we observed, he needs 300 to 400 square feet a day. And so this last year, well, I should back up and tell the story. So then at one point, we wanted to make it easier. We're like, let's make it easier for us to move the sled. We're refining our system. So we put little sleds on the bottom of the pen so we can slide it quicker and easier. And so we're doing that and testing it out. It's working pretty good. Still kind of a pain to go out there and move it every few hours, but then our steer discovered that it could move the pen as well. So we go out there one day and the pen's been moved. The steer has moved the pen by himself, and we're like, actually, this is kind of handy. It's like he's moving it himself. The problem is he kind of skews it. So instead of being a square, let's write a little picture here. So instead of being a nice square 10 by 10 pen like this, he pushes the corner because that's the easiest place to push, and it ends up looking more like this. Let's see if I can do, okay, well, yeah. I'm a really good artist, so obviously you can see that this is a nice little diamond. For those of you listening audio only, I have drawn a nice little elongated diamond. So it's getting skinnier. Instead of being a box, it's turning into a skinny box. A skinny diamond, I should say. So we straighten it back out, and this happens for about a week. And unfortunately, we weren't thinking what possibilities this might lead to. So one day we go out, and he has pushed it so far that it basically turns into a little straight line with him in the middle, and the whole thing tips over. So we go out there, and he's just hollering, and he is trapped in between the two panels, and his feet are stuck in the panel because he was kicking trying to get out. He was probably only in there for a few hours, but we obviously felt awful and ran out there and got him out of it. But his feet, because of that, were damaged a little bit. He's a big animal, and so having to lay on his feet like that can do some nerve damage, which makes it he might not be able to walk again. So then for the next week or two, we had to go out every few hours and roll him from side to side because he couldn't stand up yet. So we had to roll him back and forth from side to side so that blood would get down into his feet. And eventually we finally were able to get him to stand up on his own. He's able to walk, and it seems like he's fine now. That was several months ago. But moral of the story, we observed, we learned, we refined, we tested, and our solution was not a good one at all. So we learned, it's pretty easy to observe that it wasn't a good solution. So the next refinement we made was this spring. I was like, all right, I'm going to find out about electric fence and how it works and stuff. And man, it's way easier than I thought it was. And so I wish I would have just done that in the first place. But now we have electric fence, and we can make a nice pen as big as we want and then move him as often as we want to new pasture. And he likes it a lot better. We like it a lot better. It just works all around better. And so that's harnessing different principles and laws of the universe to make our lives better. And we did that through the process of observing, learning, refining, and testing. And obviously, if we had just been a little bit smarter, well, mostly me, my wife told me I should have gotten electric fence a long time before, but I was stubborn, which is one of those mindsets we have to get rid of. But eventually we got to the system we have now, which is much better. But I'm sure we're going to come up with an even better solution in the future. So that's my little story to illustrate the principle. Hope you enjoyed it. But the things that we're observing are the principles of nature and how the world works. Kind of the same basic principle, but the overall concept of this is we need to be figuring out how the world works so that we can use that to our advantage. Okay, so let's move on over to the last step, which is creating systems. This is my favorite part because I love creating systems and tweaking them and making them more and more efficient. And I think it's kind of the culmination of everything we've talked about before. It all leads up to now we need to create a system that harnesses everything we've learned. We've narrowed it down to this is something I can control. We've got our mindset right. It's fitting into our holistic context within our circles of influence. We're looking at the laws of nature, and now we're going to create a system. Talked about it a little bit in my story earlier about our system for moving our steer around. So a few principles in creating systems I have: maintain, improve, and explore, which is a method I have of creating systems and refining systems that I'll probably go into later because I don't think I want to tackle that right now. But that's anyway, we'll talk about that later. So the next little subject is managing resources, and so that's making sure that whatever resources we have available, we're using them correctly. And so a couple examples: budget, time management systems. All right, so let's look over here at function stacking. So function stacking, I believe it is a principle that comes from permaculture, which we will talk lots about that in the future. But basically, the idea of function stacking is looking at your different systems and figuring out how you can integrate them so that your waste products from one system turns into an input for another system. So to break that down a little bit more, each system you have is going to have inputs and it's going to have outputs. So the inputs are things like, time, money, other resources that you're putting into the system. And then every system is going to have outputs. Maybe it gives you more time or more money or other resources. And one example that they use a lot in permaculture ideas is if you have chickens, for example, they have certain needs. They need oxygen, they need space to move around, they need food, obviously, they need water, and they need shelter. So those are their inputs. Their outputs, they give feathers, they give meat, they give eggs, they give very nitrogen rich poop. They like to scratch, which can be a bad output or a good output, just like pretty much any of these can be good or bad depending on if you can use them. And they eat bugs. There's all sorts of different things you could come up with. But let's say you have chickens, and every day you have to go out there and feed them, and then every day you've got to go clean up their poop in their chicken coop. So now you have an input and you've got an output that now you have to get rid of. So what if you could take and merge them with, like, say, a vegetable garden? So now maybe you can feed the chickens some of your vegetable scraps and the produce you don't use from the garden. So now your feed bill has gone down, and your chicken's manure turns into great fertilizer. And so now, instead of it being a problem, now it's turned into the input for another system. So that's an example of function stacking, where now you've got two systems that intertwine, and in so doing makes it cost less to you in time, money, other resources. And so that's the idea of function stacking, is trying to intertwine all of your different systems. So so that's what I have for creating systems so far. So let's zoom out. Well, actually, let's go back. Let's recap a little bit. So we'll jump way back. Whoa, not that far back. So the 5 steps, once again, is mindset, holistic context, circles of influence, the law of the universe, use it to your advantage, and create systems. So that's how we solve the problems of the world. So to finish up, I want to talk about what Solve My World is now and kind of where I see it going in the future, hopefully. So if we look over here on the left, this is basically what I have so far with the Solve My World universe, I guess you could say. It's kind of a journal for me to record my thoughts. It is a website. I do have some videos, and I have a blog that I've posted some things on. So that's what Solve My World is right now. And then if we look at what we have in progress, right now I'm working on a podcast, which you happen to be listening to right now. So that's what I'm working on right now. And now what I'm kind of my vision for what Solve My World will look like in the future. I just have a bunch of thoughts I threw out, just kind of a brain dump. But one of the main ones I liked, the idea of a university for your life. I want this to be a place where people can learn from each other's experiences, and use each other's systems so that we can all help each other to solve our world, solve my world. So, like I was talking about with the laws of the universe, there's so many intricacies to the way the world works. It's very difficult to pin down what those laws are, and to be able to use them in a system, turn them into a practice, into a system that allows us to make it useful. And that's where the power of community and something like the internet makes the world have so much more potential, because now we have millions of people out there that are all researching together. We just need a way to bring all that information together so that it's easily digestible and easier for us to figure these things out, so we can all have better lives. So kind of going along with that is like a research institute. I erased it a little bit. Okay. So where we can, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a hive mind, a mob solve problems. Man, I cannot think of that word. Anyway, but the idea is if we can all be working on discovering these ways to make our lives better, then and sharing them with each other, it can be a powerful research situation. So as well as that, it'd kind of be like a training library and a hub for all that information. And then maybe even like an incubator. Like if there's a really cool business that is applying some of the principles, we can help fund it or something like that. And so these are kind of the ideas that I'm thinking about that I'd like to see Solve My World get to. And I don't know if any of these will actually happen, or if it'll go a totally different direction. But this is kind of the direction that I'm looking towards right now as I move forward. So, but for now, working on the podcast, keeping everything else going, sort of. And that's yeah, so that Solved My World. And I'm pretty excited about it. I like I said, I've always wanted to do something like this where I can try to tie together all the things that I've been interested in into one. And I hope it can be helpful for other people. So I know researching all this stuff has been very helpful in my life, and um, and I'm definitely not a master at it yet. But that's the whole point: is I want to find other like-minded people that can help me to help others, so that we can become our best selves and we can solve the world's problems. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Solve My World podcast. And if you enjoyed it, please let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, what I can do better. Um, any thoughts on any of this stuff? I know it was kind of a broad overview, and I wasn't able to go very deep into very many subjects, but that's kind of the idea of this podcast, is that I'll be able to deep dive into each one of these subjects um, as I talk about them more in the future. And so this is kind of an overview of everything, and then we can get more in depth on practical steps, like what we can actually do. So let me know if there's anything that I can do better or anything you're interested in, and we will see you next time.